Now pray that during this emphasis that we're making on very relevant subjects, that the entire church, along with the remnant, will be stirred up for their own sake. Men that just aren't into it, women that have babies, and the minute they have a baby, they don't understand that having a baby doesn't mean you go into retirement. It does mean that you have a tremendous responsibility. It does mean that you must rear up the child and love the child and invest. But it doesn't mean that you can't get together with somebody at least once in 3 weeks for 2 hours that you trust, and still every month get into some kind of soul winning program. I don't think that this is being fanatical or imbalanced when we put it that way, do you? Because reading the Bible and hearing messages, if your life is going to be so overwhelmingly into the baby without any type of balance, and certainly it requires a lot of attention and a lot of commitment, and well, it should, because the child must have the most love possible and great investment. But it doesn't mean spiritual retirement either. Now, many mothers do a wonderful job in that area, and they are to be commended. But pray, the second thing to pray is that the whole church will be revived into edification of the saints and soul winning of the lost. The third thing is pray for graduation. Pray for graduation. The fourth thing, pray for the high school seniors this time. We'll pray for the others. And college graduates. There's two things, college graduates and high school seniors. Pray that the high school seniors will choose God's will for their life and not sentimentality. And pray the same for the college seniors. And these are just some very specific things. Pray for the radio broadcast as it takes on new stations also. Now this evening, as we get into a very extensive study on some of these subjects, it's a very interesting study in history. By the way, as you study the Word of God, maybe you've done this, but as you enter into pastoring or an evangelist or missionary work as a woman as well as men, there are 10 excellent historical books which you can draw from in isagogics. Some of you probably have them, most of you do not have them. And they are the Sharp series. There's 10 of them. And they do a phenomenal job. Sometimes you may wonder where I get this information. Well, I get this information. You usually do not get any of this information from commentaries. They just aren't there, as you know yourself, this type of historical data. But you do get this information from certain books on history. I have many. Among them, there are the 10 books by Sharp. Then there are the Eusebius historical book. And I'm sorry, I don't mean Eusebius, I mean Eusebius. And there are many excellent books on isagogics. You have very slothful people when it comes to isagogics. Very few Christians care about isagogics. But it's very important because we have to know exactly what was going on and why, and that's what you're going to see in tonight's class. As I prepared for tonight's class, I was literally overwhelmed to be a Christian, very broken. And you will see why as you consider this class tonight. I also am looking into the principle of the amazing things that have happened through the centuries in Christianity. Now, for example, Moses, when he came down from Mount Sinai, wrote the 91st Psalm. And that's something that you will seldom discover. But sometimes we have to go into the isagogics of rabbis that aren't even saved. We don't go into anything they say about the book. But they are accurate Hebrews on the subject of historical frame of reference. Now we are dealing with the second church of Smyrna. And we are now in the 10th verse of the 10th verse here of this church of Smyrna. Now, as we consider this 10th verse, fear none of these things. Now, Smyrna will be amazingly persecuted. When you hear of the things I'm going to say tonight, if you would kindly think of America today and relate to this truth. America hasn't even tasted persecution. That I don't know and you don't know how many in this class would even make it to first base with persecution. I would say you in particular would make it at least to first base. Some of you would go all the way with it. I don't know how many. I have an idea a percentage of you would go all the way in persecution because of your training, your discipline, and most of all, your love for God. But I have to ask the question, how many people, based upon what they magnify in the details of life with financial pressures, which are not persecution, the world has them. Car accidents are not persecution, the world has them. Disease, the world has diseases. We're talking about persecution, such as you will be listening to this evening. Now, fear none of these things. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. The Christian is not exempt from suffering. The Christian is not exempt from persecution. Last night in the Sunday evening message, we took time to deal with persecution that happens sometimes, many times in one's own home. The son goes against the father. The daughter goes against the mother. All because of persecution. They call it something else, but it's persecution. The two kingdoms are strictly involved in the problem. But America doesn't even know how to evaluate it, let alone experience it. The average Christian wouldn't have the least idea what's going on if this church was persecuted the way it could be. You wouldn't even have the least idea. You would get involved in the mechanics of persecution, into the effects of persecution. And that's what Satan does in this country. When he persecutes the Christians that are fruitful, people get involved in the mechanics of it. That means the people involved. They get involved in the sides of it, the reasons, the effects. And it has absolutely nothing to do with it, while Satan invisibly does his work in a very unique way. Don't you ever, when your ministry is going well, wherever you go, whatever field that you may be on, don't you ever under heaven get involved in people's personalities or the things that brought the persecution or the effects of it. And don't you go home at night trying to figure anything out that has absolutely nothing to do with it, unless somebody denies the cardinal doctrines or has made a decision to live in immorality, things of that nature. But we have very clearly stated that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That's why you don't get involved in the personalities or the mechanics or the sides. I know when we left last time in Western Massachusetts, 3 or 4 guys went around to about 8 or 10 guys, and they started in telling them things. To this day, they don't know a thing they're talking about. Not a thing. Not a single thing. And a handful of people, less than 1%, listen to them. Well, they don't know a single thing they're talking about, and furthermore, their lives are anything but acceptable. You'll always find when somebody is criticizing a ministry that their life is not in order. Long before they criticized the ministry, their life was not in order. You can put that down and write it down as an historical fact. Now, verse 10, fear none of these things that thou shalt suffer. Well, fear none of those things, I better get this out of the way in a hurry, is meden, M-E-D-E-N, phobou, P-H-O-B-O-U, ha. And it's a present middle imperative. Continually participate in the verb through a mandate that you do not fear suffering, which thou shalt suffer, melo pasco, present active infinitive. You will continually be suffering. And then you have the active voice. You'll do the suffering. The infinitive is, this is a purpose of the kingdom of God, but more than that, it's a purpose accentuated by the devil's kingdom against God. Behold is that I-D-O-U, and that is, behold means to gaze at these things that are going to be spoken of, that is to contemplate what God is going to say through John. The devil, ho diabolos, masculine adjective, nominative case. He's the main instrument to be used in the Christian suffering. The devil here of this church of Smyrna, ex humon, present active infinitive, is the next verse, shall cast some of you. Melo, belo, ex humon. That's a present active infinitive. You will continually be cast into prison. The devil will do it. He produces the action of doing it. The infinitive here is, this is the purpose of his ministry. So we have that. Shall cast some of you into prison. Into prison is eis, phulakian, feminine noun, accusative case. The accusative case here means extending into that degree of suffering. That's the accusative case, that you may be tried. Now, here's a key that I'll be referring to tonight. Hina pyradzo. You've had pyradzo before, and you've certainly had H-I-N-A before. And it's an aorist passive subjunctive. You don't have to be a Greek scholar or even a student or anything to understand that God allows this to happen to try the Christian in what kind of a test? We use a synonym for momentum often. What kind of a test is it? The Christian must be tried. Aorist, passive, subjunctive. At a point of time. Or, some say, that they must receive the action. Passive voice. Maybe you will and maybe you will not. Subjunctive mood. That you may be tried. And you shall have tribulation, narrow places, future active indicative. 10 days. Hemion, deka, feminine plural noun in the genitive case. You will be tried 10 days, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Now we'll deal with that verse tonight. The 10 days means the 10 emperors of Rome, which placed Christianity into the unbelievable, indescribable persecution. Let me share with you some of the things that happened in the persecution. They would put them in mines, close off the entrances of the mines, and let them die while they were living. It was called the persecution of living death. The next category of persecution was quick lime. They would throw them in quick lime and they would sink deeply into the lime and die in front of people. The next provision for persecution was red hot chairs. Now they would have chairs, wooden chairs, they would put them on fire, and then the Christian would have to sit in the chair and be burnt to death as he was First they'd tie him to the chair so he couldn't get out. Then they would have the chair substantially so it couldn't be moved. He couldn't do anything to the chair. And then they'd set it on fire. It was called the red-hot chair approach of martyring Christians. Then, as some of us were in Rome, at the Roman Colosseum, where 80,000 people gathered and hailed Caesar as God, and every time that the families, and many of you were there with us, were brought up on the little wooden type of elevator in those days, which came up through a hydraulic plan, and the children and the families would come off from the elevator, and the lions and the beast would be hungry, and then they would immediately throw the entire family together into the place where they would be immediately consumed by the animals, the wild animals, torn to pieces, ripped apart, consumed as an entire family, while 80,000 people cheered. Now, then they were chained together in the most unusual process. They were chained together naked, Christians, facing one another as it were in promiscuity. And they would put them into promiscuity as far as the picture was concerned, chain them together, body upon body, men with women because of their convictions, chain them naked until they would hurt and bleed, and then they would leave them there until their bodies would rot with the chain. Then they would burn them, of course, at the stakes. Then they would murder them by the sword. These are some of the amazing things that happened. Before they did this, they would take their property. They would take everything they owned, including their clothing. In many cases, they would leave them without clothes and without a home. Now, what happened? Many Christians denied Jesus Christ by the thousands. And once they denied Jesus Christ by the thousands, they were used to even persecute the remnant of Christians that would not deny Jesus Christ. They would be used to prove that they meant their denial of Christ, to persecute the remaining remnant that refused to surrender their convictions of Jesus Christ. Now, when you consider these persecutions, maybe you will understand how China, Africa, Persia, Egypt, Armenia, England, Germany, and where all these amazing countries, why were they evangelized? Why were they evangelized? This is why they were evangelized. Because the remnant that survived the persecution, God bless them, fearlessly took the gospel where the Roman Empire could never conquer. See, the Roman Empire did not conquer the world, despite its 455 years of unusual dominion. Now, Rome was in power longer than that, but there was about 453 years of real powerful control. But what we have here is these Christians, these remnants from Smyrna, the Church of Philadelphia, Thyatira, when it was functioning properly, And on we could go with these 7 churches. They magnificently converted the barbarians. Now, the barbarians were extremely powerful, self-disciplined, military-oriented. In some areas, the barbarians in various countries were brilliant. They were brilliant. But the barbarians had a weakness that is so common today. The barbarians of that age tremendously feared death. They erected religious symbols. They did everything by the way of religion to take away their fear of death. But they had an unusual fear of death. And they would spend all of their lifetime for prosperity, for happiness, for joy, marriage, homes, family, security, jobs. But they fear death. You know why they fear death? Because the testimony of the Christians was so strong that even though they rejected and killed them and martyred them and persecuted them, and especially the Jewish element in Smyrna, which was so rigid in going to the emperor of Rome. For example, when Polycarp was being martyred, a group of Jews went out to get the fuel. As they went out to get the fuel to burn his body alive, they chanted and danced and raged. When they burnt Polycarp, they then took his body and threw it to the Christians. And on, persecution went on. Now, the Christians were amazingly hated. Many of them passed the test of suffering. Many of them passed the test of suffering. But later on, and this is quite a story, when Theodosius made Christianity the state-accepted religion, Christians by the thousands failed the prosperity test. The same Christians, some of them, that did not fail in the suffering test under Theodosius failed tremendously in the prosperity test. They just could not stand, in any sense of the word, prosperity. Now, the Romans, who could not conquer the world, but these Christians, God bless them, sent missionaries to China. I'll repeat this again. India, Parthia, Africa, Armenia. Now, Tertullian, who succeeded Justus Martyr, who succeeded John and Polycarp, Tertullian put it this way, and I'm going to read what he said. We, the Christians, were but yesterday, yet, O Rome, we have filled your cities, your islands, your camps, your palaces, your senate, your forum with Christians. But we have left your temples empty. And Justus Martyr put it this way. We didn't have many teachers, but we will tell you this. Every one of us had power in the Word of God, and you couldn't put out a single flame of the fires of our mouth. The well-noted Origen that you have read, possibly on many occasions, hopefully. Origen. He had something very unique to say, and this is what he said. Attacks have been made against us, reproaches that no man would understand through reading our testimonies. But all Greece, the barbarians within the world, thousands and thousands of wise and unwise living in idolatry, have accepted Jesus Christ. We couldn't make a lot of disciples to tell them, but they came out of every corner of human life because Jesus Christ permeated their souls and transformed them with the power from above. Oh, the power of the gospel. It's unbelievable. The history of the Church of Jesus Christ. 81 to 96 AD. Now we're dealing with the 10 days. Domitius, or Domitian, he started it. Unbelievable persecution under Domitian. 15 years he persecuted the Christians as a Roman emperor. Marcus Aurelius, 161 to 180. Commodus, 180 to 192. Without any type of discretion, Commodus slaughtered thousands, plus senators, plus any Christian that he could find and prove that they were a Christian. Septimus Severus, 193 to 211 was the fourth one. Then the big giant, known as the huge, strong, 8-foot strong man, Maximus Thrax, Thrax. He 235 to 238, a very short reign, 3 years. He ordered every Christian to be put to death when he became emperor, and that was one of his platforms as a Roman emperor. Then we have Decius, 249 to 251, a 2-year reign, and had a special committee hunting Christians for death. Then we had Gallius, 251 to 253, only 2 years. He said Christians must die if Gallius is going to reign. Then we had Valerian, 253 to 260. He said Christians were scums, ignorant, non-intellectual, have no common sense, and they must yield to the gods of Rome and to the God of the emperor. Then we have Aurelius, 270 to 275. Aurelius. And then we have the last one that we want to mention of these 10 is Diocletian. Diocletian was an unusual Roman emperor. 284 to 305, 21 years he reigned. He reorganized the military. He did away with the secret police. He saved the Roman Empire from economic collapse. He published an edict and froze wages and prices. He fixed relation between the worth of a Roman coin and the metal content. He had a system of taxation that brilliantly resolved the problem of cheating in the Internal Revenue Department of Rome. He saved the Roman Empire from economic disaster. He was indeed a brilliant political figure, a brilliant administrator, a brilliant military man, a brilliant economist, and he had a dear friend that he liked, and the friend's name was Maximian, and he made him a co-ruler because of this man's brilliance in all areas, and they loved to do everything together. They planned, they evaluated history, they evaluated the series of problems that past emperors had, failure in human history, and he elected or appointed this Maximian to be his co-ruler, and they come up with some of the most amazing, brilliant strategy known in any world empire or any human government. However, with all of this, and this is so sad, with all of this man's brilliance, he hated Christianity and ordered Christians to be slaughtered and killed and persecuted. Do you think there's a literal devil? You're hearing this tonight, because I'm not going to do what these little devotional and commentaries do who don't even touch this, because they refuse to go into the many sources of isagogics that we have. And you just think of the price that is paid for your heritage in the Christian faith. This man, Diocletian, was the only one, the only emperor that ever retired. Then, after he retired, he went into agriculture. And he retired as an agriculturist. He built an amazing castle, Split, in Yugoslavia. And that castle was the most brilliant structure, copied in Germany, copied in England, because of its brilliance and masterpiece in design and structure. But he ended up growing vegetables in a garden. So, from Augustus to Romelius, 476, Romelius was Augustus the Little. We had all kinds of persecution. When Diocletian retired, there was a great struggle. And out of that struggle for leadership came Constantine the Great. Now, so then you have the great persecution mentioned in Romans 2:10 from Domitian, 96 A.D., to the Edict of Balaam, 313 A.D. Now, what did this persecution do? It prepared the remnant who were tried and tested and loved Jesus Christ more than their food, more than water, more than breath, who were fearless. The remnant, they were fearless. And as this persecution was over and a remnant survived, they magnificently evangelized where the Roman government had never conquered. They went in the midst of the barbarians with all their strength and wise and unwise philosophies and ideologies. And just like they had filled the forums and the palaces and the Senate and emptied the temples in Rome, the remnant, they were fearless in their evangelization. They lived like every day would be the last day. 13 and 14-year-olds were trained to witness for Jesus Christ like the Russians would train a young child of 6 for military duty in past centuries, or past decades rather. And they were the most staunch witnesses that you would ever believe could ever happen in the history of a lifetime. So what happened out of this amazing persecution, out of this suffering? An amazing thing happened. The Anglos, the Saxons, the Shutes, the Hunts, the Franks, the Goths, and I could go on and on. The Lombards, the Vandals, the Burgundians, and all these people by the thousands came to Jesus Christ. I mean, they were converted because of a handful of persecuted remnants that went here, a few here, a few there, a few here, and a few there. They went into China. They went into Egypt. They went into Africa. They went into North Africa and Egypt. And then they had a tremendous center called the Great Alexandria Center in Egypt with its revived Carthage. These missionaries went everywhere. And finally, the nation that became the God-fearing, God-loving nation that made an impact on the world gathered together in England, and England became the nation that restrained judgment and became the means of the gospel going out throughout the then known world for many years before England decayed in its spiritual quality of life and its concepts. So when you consider out of the world came the remnant to affect these nations of Western Europe, and the Rhine and the Danube barriers were breached, and the Slavs and all these individuals heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, and some of them were gloriously saved and went into an amazing, unbelievable life of prayer. Some of them went into this amazing training program where they would learn the story of the suffering Christians, and because they took special training in studying the suffering Christians, they had a philosophy. One must suffer to prove he can stand. One must be tried before he can go. One must be tested before he can be counted upon by the army of Jesus Christ. They had this amazing training program. They practiced soul winning. They practiced soul winning into the hours of the night. They would organize soul winning adventures with hours of prayer. Sometimes they would fast 17 and 20 days and then drink water and go on an adventure with God into a field and go in as empty vessels filled with God and win some of these people that I have mentioned, such as the Lombards and the Franks and so on. And this is the story of a resurrected Christianity, of a Christianity which was not exempted from persecution, was not delivered from the furnace, was not delivered from the lion's den, but who in many cases died for the faith of Jesus Christ. They were not occupied with whether or not they spoke, whether or not somebody spoke to them. They were not occupied with how the school program was going. They were not occupied with men and women and mechanics and families. They were living for Jesus Christ. Every single breath they took meant prayer. It meant gospelizing. It meant evangelizing. It meant planning. It meant purposing in their heart to take up the slack of their dear, dear loved ones and families and friends that had been martyred in these amazing, atrocious ways that we have mentioned this evening. You will be required more than any other subject in your exam coming up shortly to put down the things that I've said in this class right to the letter. I'll require you to understand the Roman persecution in detail. You are to understand what happened, when it happened, why it happened, what took place. Do research, do anything you want, but you must understand that Christians suffered courageously so that tonight a sinner saved by grace can stand in this pulpit and preach the truth. It was said by Tertullian. It was said by Origen. It was said, we do not have gifted teachers, but we have spirit-filled hearts. They would say, we haven't had time to train many, but oh, they're motivated by prayer and a living God. These men were not against training. They just were being so persecuted they didn't have the opportunities for the classes and the training, and because of secret meetings and hiding that they would have desired to have had. All right? But the sad part of it is, and it is indeed a sad story, that when Theodosius took over and they became a state religion, Christianity, thousands fail with an easy lifestyle. And I could stand before you tonight and weep, because that's what threatens you young people. Getting together and talking about the things that will make you happy. You have 6th graders today that are talking sex from parents of this ministry. I have never in my history as pastor seen 7th graders behave like they do today, and 8th graders and freshmen in high school, and they can run around and do anything they want, and if good parents try to stop them, they threaten them by saying, "You don't let me do it, I'll go to the police or I'll lie about you." Now, we have many wonderful children and parents, but some good parents that aren't even at fault. But we are living in a country that is predetermined to be comfortable. You are the victim of a nation where even leaders are selfish and can't trust God for their daily bread. They panic when there's a prospect that income isn't coming in. They never consider that maybe it's a kingdom battle where the provision will only come on our knees in quiet, believer priest fervency of intercession. God will put true Christians into places where they can't talk their way out of it, rationalize way out of it. They just got to get to know God. It's time that we raised up an army in greater grace, that your only desire is to get to know the Christ. Never mind the details of life other than to be accountable. Never mind the petty problems that the world and you face. Get to know this spring and this summer the living God. Personally, intimately, innately, entirely. Leave the comfortable mentality of pleasure seeking. Some of you would rather go home 3 or 4 weeks out of 8 to some little thing back home. That's not Christianity. I'm talking about if there's an event. We are in a battle to win souls in a city. We're in a battle to snatch a soul on the pit of hell, and with the gospel of Jesus, snatch him out on a Saturday morning or a Friday night or a Thursday night. We in tears and in prayer will bathe the work of God with fervency. We won't take off. Some of you are selfish and proud and arrogant, and you take off on a trip without even consulting heaven because you're a dignified, well-to-do person that's secure in the American lifestyle. That's sin. We're to be conscientious, fervent, committed, and souls are going to hell, and souls can go to heaven. And we are to take up the banners of the thousands and thousands that were martyred and tortured, and we are to walk the straight line and go forward at any age for the cause of a kingdom of Christ. And I hesitate not to tell you that you better be careful about your prayer life. You better be careful talking about details of life. You better get most serious. Jesus Christ wants to raise up an army of committed Christians who for them to live is Jesus Christ, and to die is to join him forever. Father, dismiss us in Jesus' name. Amen.